Hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome to your morning briefing here from Early Warning Network for Monday, the 14th of April, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. We have a lot to cover in today's show. It's a surprisingly long weekend for a two-day weekend. Robert, good morning. Let's go ahead and jump inside the Beltway here. What's the latest here coming out of Big Law?
Good morning, Mike. So Friday, 5 more law firms that they're going to provide free legal services to the Trump administration, totaling $600 million. And this is on top of some of these other big law firms that are Democrat aligned that have pledged $340 million. So we're now at almost $1 billion in free legal services the Trump administration has gotten. And this was after that initial wave of law firms had their security clearances revoked and their access to federal facilities limited by the Trump administration. And I think this is important because I think Trump is now doing to big law what he has done to other groups. He's exercising, I think, much more explicit power effectively to stop or disrupt any attempts by these big law firms to oppose the Trump administration.
Okay. So are they providing these free legal services? I mean, is this quid pro quo? They're doing this, and in return, the Trump administration is going to leave them alone, or what? I guess I don't.
Well, in the first wave were some of these big law firms like Perkins Coie that actually both either opposed the Trump administration during his first term or refused legal services outright based on partisan alignment ahead of the 2020 and 2024 elections. That what was interesting about this new group of law firms is they actually approached the Trump administration first. Rather than responding to a threat of revoking their access to federal government. So to me, this is a sign that the Trump administration is, I think, disrupting any kind of potential support for a lot of this Trump resistance lawfare from these big law firms.
This is interesting. Let's table that for now. We'll move on here. Nothing significant to report today for congressional hearings. However, this is very interesting. Apparently, the Chinese threatened cyber attacks against the United States.
Yeah, this was a secret meeting that was held in December during the Biden administration. And there were a group of U.S. officials who said that during this meeting, Chinese officials indirectly confirmed that the Volt Typhoon and Salt Typhoon hacks are actually linked to China. And he said that the perception from the U.S. officials at the meeting was that this was a warning to the U.S. not to get involved in a China-Taiwan conflict. And to me, this is the most important point here is that this is an indicator, I think, that China believes the U.S. will not respond to a massive cyber attack with either our own cyber attack or a kinetic response. And I think this is likely a miscalculation on China's part and increases the risk of a U.S.-China conflict.
Yeah, that's dangerous. I can see maybe the Biden administration not doing that, but you can't expect that with Trump.
Yeah, that was the State Department. Apparently, their response to this breaking story was that the Trump administration has made clear to China that the Trump administration will take actions in response to Chinese malicious cyber activity. And what I've seen, there are indicators that the Trump administration is taking a much more offensive strategy with cyber, but that they are more willing to, especially if we see something like a mass casualty event, consider that above the threshold for armed conflict and respond with some type of kinetic response.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sure seems to me like this is over the edge of an act of war. All right, Robert, thanks. Let's go ahead and move on to today's roll-up items. I'll let you take it away, starting with Mexico.
Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum said that Mexico is going to deliver more water to Texas under this 1944 water agreement. And she said Mexico's working to alleviate its own water shortages and is going to increase water deliveries so long as they do not negatively impact Mexico's own water security. And I think this is a direct response to the sanctions threat, but I think an indicator that in the long term, where you might start seeing much about more explicit conflicts, interstate conflicts over water resources, because they rely on the Colorado River Basin, which a lot of U.S. states also rely on for not just drinking water, but agriculture and power as well. Mm-hmm. And then the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said that there are now, I think it was 724 confirmed measles cases, which is a 17% increase last week. And we're now seeing measles cases confirmed in 24 states. And there are some public health officials that said that the CDC is likely undercounting these measles cases because there's been 2 deaths, and the casualty case rate is something like 1 in 1,000. So they're saying that we could actually have thousands of measles cases happening in the United States this year, just so far.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks for that, Robert. Let's move on to our global roll-up items, starting with U.S. and Iran. Jared.
Absolutely. The talks are pretty constructive over the weekend. According to both U.S. and Iranian officials, they will resume talks this Saturday in Europe. The exact location hasn't been confirmed, but there are rumors it will be Rome. And the Iranian foreign minister immediately went to Russia to debrief them on the talks. Wasn't clarified as to why. Now, in a different diplomatic push, Chinese President Xi is touring a couple of ASEAN nations, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. He's promoting China as stable and the U.S. is unpredictable. Meanwhile, his commerce minister is trying to make this two-pronged, telling ASEAN to stand united against harmful U.S. trade measures. And the Philippines is reminding everybody in that association that, hey, they've been attacking us for the past 2 straight years. China also announced a halt to several rare earth minerals. I've got the total list in the report for today. And Japan and NATO released a joint statement that's coming from the top officials for both of those entities. And they declared peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait as an indispensable element in security, which, being that this is actually a kind of a global peace between Japan and NATO, I think that signals that I think we've got more confirmation that Europe would likely be militarily involved, at least a little bit, in a Taiwan contingency. But we would expect a lot more. I expect a lot more diplomatic and economic involvement to help hinder China.
Mm-hmm. Well, NATO has been growing a lot closer to Japan. I know NATO and South Korean military forces were working on military interoperability. Jared, do you remember if that extended to Japan or not?
Oh, Japan's the most integrated Asian nation with NATO. They have their own separate entity embedded in Europe with NATO, and they're taking away lessons from the Ukrainians in order to actually build up their military. Japan's absolutely leading the charge on this.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, I forgot Japan. Didn't they just built an office in Brussels or something like that?
Mm-hmm. It used to be that it was handled by their ambassador, and they still have their own separate entity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks for those roll-up items, Jared. Let's go ahead and move on to today's warning. We're going to start with Ray Dalio here. I've followed Ray Dalio since 2016. He was in Davos. He said the United States is headed towards a civil war, and he boiled it down to capitalists versus the socialists. And again, this is in 2016, so almost 10 years ago. And he was on Meet the Press yesterday morning, and he is promoting a book, and it's a book called How Countries Go Broke. It's one book in a series of books now, talking about big debt cycles and Dalio's argument is large countries go broke because they have too much debt. Okay, surprise, surprise. Back in 2022, he wrote this book. It's a really good book. It's called Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order. And Dalio kind of lays out his case for what he thinks could happen to the United States over the next 10, 20, 40 years. For now, let's go back to this Meet the Press segment. I do have this video. It's a minute long. I'm just going to play you the whole video because he covers a lot, and then I'll jump back and follow up.
I think that right now we are at a decision-making point and very close to a recession. And I'm worried about something worse than a recession if this isn't handled well. A recession is 2 negative quarters of GDP, and whether it goes slightly there, we always have those things. We have something that's much more profound. We have a breaking down of the monetary order. We are going to change the monetary order because we cannot spend the amounts of money, so we have that problem. And when we talk about the dollar and we talk about tariffs, we have that. We are having profound changes in our domestic order, how ruling is existing, and we're having profound changes in the world order. Such times are very much like the 1930s. I've studied history, and this repeats over and over again. So if you take tariffs, if you take debt, if you take the rising power challenging the existing power, if you take those factors and look at the factors, those changes in the orders, the systems, are very, very disruptive. How that's handled could produce something that is much worse than a recession.
All right. So that's Ray Dalio, founder of Bridgewater Associates, which I believe is still the world's largest hedge fund, and for many years was the world's most successful hedge fund. So Ray Dalio has built a career on making big bets with other people's money, and he became a multimillionaire, and then he went broke, and then now he's a billionaire. And so this is not someone who is prone to exaggeration, I don't think. Back in 2022, he published this book, Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order, and he did this multi-thousand-year study, and he was looking at world orders, or 1,000 years ago, not world orders, but essentially regional powers and empires controlling the known world. And what he found was, especially in modern times, this is the chart that he publishes and describes in this book. And so you have this world order, you have this period of prosperity, and then you get a big debt bubble, because what happens is, in the age of fiat money, these governments or these central banks, they print money during bad times, which is what they're meant to do. But the problem is they keep printing money during good times, and they're supposed to print money during bad times, and then during good times pay down the debt. And they don't do that. They just keep ramping up the debt. And so you have this massive financialization of assets. You have this big wealth gap. And he says this exists in essentially all world orders in the modern era. And then you finally get to a debt bust, because that debt becomes so unsustainable. And I've circled that red circle is where I think we are right now. We're not yet to the debt bust, but lots of people are talking about sovereign debt crisis. Brent Johnson, who runs Santiago Capital, the milkshake theory guy, very interesting theory there. He says I believe, I'm almost certain he said on this last podcast that the United States is headed towards a sovereign debt crisis. And so, we could be looking at this. But following on this cycle here, then you get into printing money and credit. The United States, everyone wants to talk about $37 trillion in national debt. We have over $200 trillion in unfunded liabilities. And so that's something that's not going to be taxed out of the economy. That's something that's not going to be cut out of the budgets. That is something that they're going to have to print money to make that debt sustainable again. So we're talking about multiple trillions of dollars still ahead of us. If you think money printing was bad so far, you ain't seen nothing yet. And then Ray Dalio says on the back end, the downhill end, you get revolutions and wars, you get debt and political restructuring. If the United States is lucky, we'll be able to restructure our debt. Lots of people are going to get haircuts. It's going to be a very painful process for all Americans and for much of the world. Political restructuring means new governments forming, old governments going away. Again, this is part of this collapsing world order that Ray Dalio talks about for this book. And then finally, you get a new world order. Dalio does not hide his affinity for China. China, he says, is ascendant. The United States is descendant. How long it's going to take and how rapid it will happen, how bad it's going to be determined. But this is what Ray Dalio says. And again, Ray Dalio has made billions of dollars making bets. And so this is someone I listen to. I take him seriously when he talks about this stuff. Also because he lays all this stuff out in a very methodical, rational, logical way. It's easy to follow. And, I've talked about this book multiple times on the show before. So this is also something, every Friday I publish a weekly economic outlook for Early Warning Pro members. And this is not just Ray Dalio. These are big banks starting to talk about the changing monetary order, a confidence crisis in U.S. treasuries and indeed the dollar. And I've been cautiously optimistic that Trump is going to be able to pull back on this and stop this capital flight that is probably happening in the United States right now. This is something that I'm paying attention to day to day and week to week. And that's where we are now. I do think this is serious, and this is something I'm paying attention to. And this is something we will revisit as frequently as it takes to keep everyone on top of these developments. With that, let's go ahead and move on to the next item. I want to bring Robert here on this. Robert, if you can just fill us in on the details of this arson attack that happened on the Pennsylvania governor's mansion this weekend.
Yeah, early yesterday morning, there was an arson attack on the Pennsylvania governor's mansion while Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro was having dinner with his family, or while I guess they were celebrating Passover. And state officials, they say that this was conducted with a homemade incendiary device, and the suspect in this case, named Cody Palmer from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, carefully planned the attack, according to these officials.
Mm-hmm. You know, police have not released a motive in this attack. However, there have been some internet sleuths that have gone back and looked at his social media presence. The guy is very clearly pro left wing social media posts. This is one from his Facebook account. There's this little Molotov cocktail and it says, "Be the light you want to see in the world." This is something that I see recurring on far left social media. It's a far left meme. There's several other posts that also give us that indication. Harrisburg is actually a mid-tier city for far left groups and activity like Antifa and arson attacks. Very common far left tactic. Robert, have you seen anything else to suggest what this guy's motive may be?
Well, yeah, I think looking at what little bit of the social media activities he's shared a lot of social media posts from far left groups. There's been a little bit of a spin on this, I think, from some outlets because he did did not like President Biden. But I think that is being used to say that he is a Trump guy when there are a lot of far left people who also did not like the Biden administration.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we both read that Newsweek article that said, oh, the arsonist posted anti-Biden rhetoric on his social media profile and making it appear like maybe, casting aspersions that this guy was pro-Trump. This guy was obviously not pro-Trump. And as you point out, Antifa hated Biden and they hate Trump. So liberals next. You remember that Battle of Berkeley? Was that back in 2017 or so, 2016, 2017? One of these far left, the rioters, Antifa rioters, scrawled some graffiti on the wall that said "liberals next," basically saying Trump and the fascists first, and then we're going to go after liberals. So lots of anti-liberal sentiment there too. All right, Robert, any closing comments on this before we move on?
Yeah, I think that what's dangerous about this is that regardless of what his ad motive was, that it looks like there are a lot of these self-radicalized, politically motivated attacks are growing over the last roughly 6 months, starting with the attempted assassination against President Trump before the election, this really large Tesla takedown movement, and now a pretty blatant attack on a state official. I think we're potentially going into a political era in the United States where people are going to be more prone to this type of lone wolf violence, just because they look at the media coverage of the Tesla takedown stuff and the attempted assassinations. And I think there's a perception that they will have media coverage to do this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that argument. I would also say, unlike 2020, these folks are being arrested and slapped with felony charges. And I think that it has a deterring effect. Will stuff like this continue to happen? I'm sure it will. But I look at these Tesla attacks, and they'd ramped up over the past couple of months until these people started looking at 20 years in prison, and now all of a sudden there's just been some pretty low level. Actually, I think there was maybe one attack in the last week or so, but I actually think that's slowing down. All right, Robert, thanks for that. Let's go ahead and move on here to this military authority. So explain what this is. There's a strip of land along the border here that the federal government is taking greater control over?
Yeah, this is the Roosevelt Reservation, and it was established by President Teddy Roosevelt in order to secure the border. So this memorandum that's been issued by the Trump administration is directing all of the cabinet agencies to work with the Department of Defense to expand defense jurisdiction over these federal lands. And they're calling them national defense areas. And this memo gives the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth the authority to declare more parts of the border as national defense areas. And according to the memo, the primary activity is going to be ramping up surveillance and barriers at the border, more barrier construction. But it also appears to expand military powers to expel illegal immigrants unilaterally, and if they cross the border in these designated national defense areas. And I think there's also been an additional destroyer deployed down to support this border mission. So I think part of this is, Jared and I were talking before the show, this is also the part of the border that does not have a natural barrier like the Rio Grande on the other half of the border. So this part of the border does see a lot more activity. I think, though, over the last couple of months, the border encounters in general have fallen by multiple orders of magnitude. I think that the last I saw, they're talking like in the low hundreds to below 100 encounters, depending on the month.
Mm-hmm. All right. Hey, let's get Jared on here. Jared, Robert just said that the U.S. Navy had deployed a destroyer down there. A, where, and B, what's the significance of a destroyer?
Two, actually. The Spruance and the Stockdale. And a destroyer is your primary surface combatant, but it's also the way that the Navy's kind of structured itself in the 21st century. They're a dual ship. They name a mission, they can pretty much do it except for launching fighters. What this would allow them to do is give them a lot of sensor options for monitoring the situation, and interdiction options if there are any attempts to circumvent the border by just running up the water, which, being that San Diego is right next to Tijuana,
we've seen plenty of videos of those boats landing on the coast of California. Yeah,
there's plenty of that. They also, destroyers regularly practice being essentially the information warfare commander, so you could have them be an offshore, I think you've frequently referred to them as like an S2, basically your guy for coordinating the whole picture.
Okay, I see. All right, interesting. All right, thanks for that. Let's move on to the next item here, and it's Jared's piece. All right, Jared, we've talked a lot about China coming in and undermining U.S. and other Western industries, essentially trying to destroy these industries by flooding these markets with Chinese exports that are so cheap that no Western industry could conceivably compete with them. And it looks like China's now set its sights on British steel.
Yes. So there was some issue with this earlier in the year, but here it's really coming to fruition. The negotiations on the Chinese investment group that owns British Steel, which it was a formerly nationalized conglomerate producing, at one point it made 90% of British, of all the UK steel. I don't think it makes quite that much anymore, but it's still an enormous amount. Anyways, those negotiations broke down to the point where the Chinese demanded hundreds of millions of pounds be sent to that investment group with no restrictions on where it could go. So, hey, we can just send that right back to China. And they would not be held liable for just letting the furnace fester and not actually running anything. So basically just bribe us and we'll stay here. And the British obviously were not having that. Now, the British Prime Minister and Business Minister are publicly discussing nationalizing British Steel, the company, on grounds of national security. And Parliament already has a bill in the works, though it reportedly stopped short of nationalization. Basically, it would subsidize a lot of the materials in order to produce steel and just pump it back out, but it would still technically be a private corporation. I think they will go the nationalization route because that's how British Steel was made in the first place. Now, why this matters? There's now a record in the West of China using investment to destroy national security infrastructure, because that's what this is. Without British Steel, which you can see domestic production, the UK only has about 40% of its needs made by all of its domestic production. British Steel has a super majority of that with a single furnace, which China said they're absolutely shutting that one down no matter what, producing 20% of the UK's total production. So they would shut off 8% of its needs in a single furnace. Without that, the UK can't field a navy. The NATO loses 2 strike groups right off the bat. And this is effectively an attempt to hobble NATO and Europe as the US pivots to Asia, which I don't think is a coincidence since we just saw a British-led strike group head to Asia.
Mhm. Yeah, Jared, it's amazing to me how many of these Western companies and industries would jump for joy if China were no longer able to use economic warfare to bankrupt them and drive them out of business through unfair competition. It seems like the Trump tariffs, and you can complain about or criticize the Trump administration for how they were rolled out and at what percentage, and okay, all of that. We're talking about style points here, but just in terms of striking a deal with the United States to combat Chinese economic warfare, it seems like a lot more of the world would want to jump in on that. I actually posted about this on Friday. Just real quick, let me see if I can bring this this chart up here. All right, this is from Deutsche Bank, and they say steel has always been the heart of industrial power, which is 100% true. You are not going to be a military power without some domestic source of steel, and we can clearly see here in the United States, China has really supplanted the United States as the global producer of steel. And this is a huge problem because Trump is talking about, hey, we're going to go bring manufacturing back to the United States. We're going to reindustrialize. We're going to build factories. Well, good luck building factories. Good luck building vehicles and ships and planes without steel. So this is something that's not only affecting the UK, it's also affecting the United States. And heretofore, I have not seen a plan. Look, the United States has two major problems. We do not produce enough energy as it is. We have massive energy shortfalls. There are AI data centers right now that are being put on hold for construction because there's not enough juice. Even if they built the facilities, there's not enough electricity to power them. And so, Robert, this is something that he's covered often, is the jostling right now to bring all these coal-fired power plants back and get these shuttered natural gas plants back up and running. And then the second problem is steel. We don't make enough of it. We don't make enough rare earth metals. We don't make enough, a lot of the things that we actually need to do all this stuff. So this is point being, this is not an overnight process. This is going to take years, if not decades, honestly. All right, Robert, do you have anything you want to add on that topic?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, then we will get to your questions here. Oh yeah. Jared's, sorry, Jared. He just posted in the chat that Battle of Berkeley, where the far left Antifa spray painted a wall. It wasn't liberals next. It said liberals get the bullet too. Yeah. So this is not just Trump, quote unquote, the fascists, Trump and the fascists getting the bullet. Liberals get the bullet too. That's what they spray painted on the thing, which goes back to the point. Antifa actually hates Joe Biden too, and Kamala Harris and all this stuff. That's why there's a guy on Twitter and he said, or X, and he says he does the GPS with the phones, and he says, "Oh, this guy's we've tracked his GPS from his cell phone, and this Antifa guy attended dozens of Kamala Harris rallies." What Antifa militant is going out and supporting Kamala Harris rallies? Approximately zero. So I don't know. I think that guy's insane. All right, with that, Jared, if you can, please go ahead and get some of these questions teed up. Regarding the measles, only 7 states are listed on the CDC page. You have a comprehensive list of the 24.
Yeah, they're actually on the CDC measles page, and they actually say 25 jurisdictions because they consider New York City and New York State separately. So it's actually 25 locations on that list. So I can put them in the EWN network.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks for that. Next question. In the event China moves on Taiwan with a blockade, what secondary travel, border, and shipping restrictions are most likely to go along with it? Well, I guess first we're going to see a massive rerouting of container ships, not only out of China, but through the whole South China Sea. I guess some of that stuff's going to stop. I would expect China-U.S. trade to trickle down to approximately zero.
The trade almost certainly would. Given the history of espionage and overstaying visas, I would not be shocked to find that the student visas from China just stop. Like, immediately begin an investigation into every single one of them, because at this point they're basically all called for actually there was a congresswoman over the weekend saying that, hey, yeah, every single one of them is called by the CCP to like legally bound to be spies. So that's an issue.
That's true.
Wouldn't be
Yeah.
shocked to find that's the thing. And actually, it doesn't just stop at students; it's their entire diaspora. So there are some societal implications there.
It is at a minimum passive collection. When those students may be contacted by an agent here in the United States, but at a minimum, when they go back home to China, they get debriefed on whatever intelligence requirements and collection requirements the Chinese have, MSS has.
Yep. Yeah. Robert, I figured since we're asking for responses from the West, you could probably fill in a lot of that too.
Yeah, I would expect there to be a lot more crackdown on trade. Like the supply chains are probably going to be disrupted, not just
it's going to be. People thought 2022 and 2020 was bad for commodities and for supply chains. This is going to break the back of globalization. It's going to be inflationary. And Robert, sorry to cut you off, but yeah, 100%. It's going to be inflationary. There are going to be product shortages. There's going to be stuff that we need that we cannot get because we don't make it here.
Yeah, and I think it's not even just from China or even East Asia. It's going to be India, where we get a lot of stuff from, especially. There's been a shift, I think, in a lot of the pharmaceutical stuff that what has moved out of China has moved largely to India, and that's a neighbor of China and will probably also be disrupted in some way.
Mm-hmm.
So that can be, but China does have an issue trying to protect power over there. They would pretty much have to use their rotational force out of Djibouti to go attack it, and you've got 3 ships, which includes a supply ship, available. That's it. It wouldn't, that particular disruption wouldn't last terribly long. I think my other main concern would be any kind of cyber attacks that would be an immediate fallout, because I could see them shutting down large portions of the internet for this.
Well, really, we're talking about World War III, because from last week, one of our key assumptions and key conclusions was, in order for China to take Taiwan, they're going to have to take lands. They're going to have to take these islands from Japan. Japan and the Philippines already said they're going to get into it with China in support of Taiwan. It's going to draw the United States in. I mean, really, we're looking at like World War III when this does kick off. So we can extrapolate from there. Maybe we can do a little bit deeper dive in here. Just for the sake of time, we'll go ahead and move on to some more questions. Peter says, you've said that we lived through a failed cultural revolution. So we lived through, I think the cultural revolution is somewhat ongoing. We lived through a failed popular revolution. 2020, just doctrinally, when you look at what happened and you stack it up versus the doctrine TTPs of a popular revolution, it was an attempted popular revolution. Other than riots, what would a successful revolution have looked like? And what would have been the next step beyond the riots? So what they wanted to do, you go down and you look at these groups back in 2020, shut down DC. I've talked about this repeatedly. There was a zine or a pamphlet circulated around back in 2020. It was called Choke Points in a Fragile Network. And it was all about how minimal, it was about points of leverage where you could shut down ports, you could shut down major shipping hubs and interstates. And you look at shut down DC and these other groups and what they were trying to do. They were going to increase the pressure by attacking the U.S. economy, essentially by trying to grind the U.S. economy to a halt. And they were going to do that if Trump had remained in office, either legitimately or illegitimately, whether he was officially elected or not. If he had stayed in office, we would have seen this. You go back to this whole concept of a color revolution or a popular revolution, and it is predominantly nonviolent, so it uses social power. And so it uses social power to attack the 3 pillars of government: legitimacy, claiming that the Trump administration was illegitimate back then. You attack authority, so you get people to not follow these federal laws. You undermine the federal government's authority. And then finally, you attack the capacity of government. So a government needs manpower, it needs resources to go out and perform its obligations. And so those are the 3 pillars of the government. And this whole popular revolution was every bit of a revolution as any other. It was just not using military means. It was using predominantly nonviolent means. And we're talking about mass mobilization protests. And really, we're talking about mass political defiance. And when you have millions of Americans attacking a federal government's legitimacy, any state's legitimacy, capacity, and authority, you end up degrading those things for a government. And so this whole, Peter, to answer the question, a successful revolution would have looked like forcing Trump from office like Euromaidan or Arab Spring. It's exactly what 2020 was. It was the American Spring, essentially, is what they were trying to build. The next steps beyond the riots would have been to install some temporary president or have Mike Pence, I guess, be vice president. But the whole outcome in these color revolutions is a lot of times once they force a president or they force a dictator, they force whoever from power, there's some sort of transitional government. Someone steps up, acting president, and then they work on engineering quote unquote free and fair elections. So that would have been the next step. In terms of leftists attacking a fellow leftist, listen, we have to be very careful when we talk about the left because it's not a monolith. There's the left. Actually, one of these days I'll throw this slide up for everybody. But the left is actually a big umbrella, and it goes from everywhere from moderate Democrats, so your blue dog Democrats, all the way to progressives, and then you have Democratic socialists, and then you have people. This is getting closer to the far left, and the far left are the revolutionary anarchists. And so, if we were to divide the left into two categories, we have reformists and we have revolutionaries. And the reformists, Shapiro is a reformist. He does not want to topple the government. He does not want to destroy the state. He wants to take it over and turn it into a quasi-socialist state or democratic socialist state, or at least, I don't know exactly what Shapiro's exact political policies are, but he is at least a progressive. And so they want to reform the government and turn it into a left-wing government. And then you have the far left, the revolutionaries. And they do. In the terms of, for anarcho-communists, they want to topple the state. They are anarchists. They don't believe in hierarchy. They want to overturn what they say are all forms of hierarchy is oppression. And so they want to live in this oppressionless world, which means they have to topple the government. And abolish police, abolish prisons, abolish capitalism, Christianity, okay, all the things that we have now. And so I don't look at Shapiro as a leftist. I think he's a progressive reformist. He is not a revolutionary in the strictest sense. Like he's not an Antifa militant. Okay, that's like far left. Right? How much attention is being given to the northern border? Robert, Jared, I know there's been talk about that's part of these Canada tariffs, trying to get Canada to do more, cut into the fentanyl. I think pretty good, but Robert, you watch the border a lot closer than I do.
Yeah, the Trump administration has been making moves on that, and you're right, that is part of this tariff negotiation. But I think the problem with the northern border compared to the southern border is just the amount of undeveloped land on the U.S. side that makes it more difficult to actually enforce anybody coming over the border. And I've also seen a lot of commentators and politicians talk about how the Canadian border situation is overblown, but I don't think that's actually true. I think it's actually, for lack of a better word, underblown. There's a lot of fentanyl trafficking. Like there will be, reports of, 40 pills caught by CBP. But from what I understand, the fentanyl and just in general cartel activity in Canada has picked up significantly over the last few years. And another issue with actually enforcing that against traffic coming over the Canadian borders, that my understanding is a lot of that is tied into the trucking industry in Canada that has been taken over by effectively immigrant workforces that cooperate with the cartels and smuggling. So there's a lot of this smuggling of fentanyl and other narcotics and people coming over the border that's just not being watched because it's not known to authorities.
Yeah. As part of the tariff negotiations, don't forget that Alberta did say that they were specifically going to enforce their section of the border, and that I think that's going to play out in each one, except for probably over near Vancouver. Just that it tends to be a bit more on the liberal side. I think you bring up a good point about what kind of issues there are as well. This is probably much more drug related than it is personnel related, just due to bottlenecks that you would have trying to get people into Canada to smuggle people into the United States. There's just not a lot of infrastructure to do it over land, and you pretty much have to do it by flight.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks for that. Let's move on to the next questions about the southern border. There's been reports of cartel members offering cash. Listen, there is some truth to this. I don't know about giving them 24 hours to leave, maybe. But for years now, at least 5 to 10 years, cartels have been buying up ranches and on the border. And they do this so they can have freedom of movement for people and drugs and whatever else they're smuggling. And so, yes, the cartels have been effectively moving the border north in some parts of Texas because they're going in and they've been buying these ranches. And if you have a multi-billion-dollar a year trafficking and drug industry, what's a $2 million ranch or a $5 or $10 million ranch is nothing. And so, yes, that has been happening. In terms of the prevalence or how frequent it is, I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I'd have to ask some friends at Border Patrol and they were the ones that told me that. Robert, is this Roosevelt Act? Does this have anything to do with in response to that?
I haven't seen anything that shows that it's a direct response to this, but it would make sense that it would counter that, just because they're, like you said, they've been if they're pushing the border more northward, then this is a direct, this would directly counter that by allowing Hexas to declare these national defense areas.
Mm-hmm. All right, Jared, do we have any other good questions we can get to today? We'll do one more question. We'll just pick the best one, please.
You're muted, Jared.
Sorry, there's one more about Chinese manufacturing, but I don't have an answer for it. That's it.
Okay. All right, we'll do 0 or more. All right, everyone, thanks so much for the support. Thanks for watching. As a reminder, we do this Intel briefing every single morning, Monday through Friday at 08 Central Time. Thanks for watching. We'll be back in your inbox tomorrow morning, back on the show starting at 08. Until then, be well and stay out front.